Hello, this is a recording, part of the online classroom for the module Mbl5903. This module is known as Strategic Financial Management, and it's the sister module to MBA 5903. Both of these modules have the same outcomes, like specific module outcomes, and they are also based, they also have the same syllabus objectives, but they do have different prescribed textbooks. Although the past papers for MBA 5903 will be used to help with your revision for MBL 5903 and vice versa. So you'll notice that this module is divided into some key study units, and all in all it consists of 4 study units. So as we go through those study units, we'll be using assignment questions as examples. Study unit 1 is essential concepts in financial management. It consists of 3 key concepts: time value of money, bonds, stock and equity. Study unit 2 is risk analysis, and it consists of 5 key concepts: simple risk techniques, risk and return, portfolio theory, the capital asset pricing model, and risk management, foreign exchange risk and interest rate risk. Study unit 3 consists of 4 key items: capital budgeting techniques, project cash flows and risks, cost of capital, and capital structure. And lastly, study unit 4 consists of 3 key areas: types of measures, measure analysis, valuation of measures. The last study unit tends to be a bit more theoretical, whereas the other study units have a lot of technical parts, a lot of mathematical parts, as well as some other theoretical parts. So today I am going to introduce you to the time value of money, what it's all about, what we mean by the time value of money, and then I'll also introduce you to some key concepts that are used when we talk about the time value of money, and then we'll look at some questions from the assignment as examples. Okay, so as part of the online classroom, I'll be using this whiteboard to take you through some of the key concepts you are supposed to know for this module. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at today is time value of money, and then after that, in the next classes, we'll continue with some examples. Then I'll take you through bonds and valuation of bonds, what bonds are, how we value bonds. Then I'll also take you through equity, what equity means, and how we value equity. But for today, I'll start with an introduction on time value of money. If you've done some financial management before, or investment management, you might have come across time value of money, so it might be something you're familiar with. So calculations involving time value of money, they can be done using either tables or using a financial calculator. So before I just take you through some definitions you're supposed to know with regards to this module, the first thing you need to do is you need to remember that when we're dealing with time value of money, talking about it or doing calculations, we will be using either tables or either a financial calculator. Personally, I prefer if you would use a financial calculator, because as much as you can use tables, tables have certain limitations. Like you can't always use tables for some questions. It will take too much time. So this one, tables tend to have a time constraint associated with them. But there are also some questions where you need tables instead of the financial calculator. So what I'll try to do, where I think it won't take too much time and it might be beneficial, I will explain examples to you using both a financial calculator as well as using tables. Like I'll use both approaches where I think it might be beneficial. Otherwise, I will mostly just refer to the financial calculator. Now, with regards to the financial calculator, I am going to be basing my explanations on is the following. I'm going to be basing my explanations on this HP financial calculator. So you need to have this HP 10BL B2 Plus calculator. This is the calculator you should get. I know some of you might have a Texas Instruments calculator or a Sharp calculator, but I tend to prefer this calculator right here. It's easier to work with this, and I just have the software for this one. I don't have the software for the Sharp or the Texas Instruments. So just to make things easier for all of us, I would advise you to get this HP calculator. The prices of these calculators are all more or less the same, but for the purposes of this module, my answers and my calculations will be based on this calculator. So as I said, we can also use tables in this module. These are some of the tables you can use. Usually you'll find them at the back of your textbook, whatever financial management or investment management text, usually financial management textbook, whichever financial management textbook you might be using to help you with your studies, you'll usually find tables. So there are tables to help you to calculate what we call future values, present values, annuities. So I'm going to take you through all of those definitions about what we mean by present values, future values, and so forth. So I'll also be referring to tables occasionally, but the main means by which we will be going through this module is using our financial calculators. Okay, so make sure you get the HP financial calculator. Okay, the HP financial calculator, the one that I just put up on the screen. Get an HP financial calculator. The specific mode, it's an HP 10B2 Plus. HP is an HP 10B2 Plus, or these are two I's, I'm not sure. Okay, so once you have your financial calculator and you also understand that some of these questions can also be answered using tables, we can now look at some important definitions we are going to be looking at in this module. So I'm just going to take you through some important definitions you need to know about. And then once you are familiar with those definitions, we'll be able to look at some questions as examples. Okay. So I'm going to explain what we mean when we say present value of money. I'm also going to take you through what we mean when we say the future value of money. I'm going to explain about what we mean when we say interest rate. Interest rate can also be called a discount rate, and it can also be called cost of capital. I'm going to explain what we mean by this. I'm also going to explain what we mean by cash flows. And with cash flows, we can have what we call a regular pattern of cash flows, or irregular or unconventional. I'm going to explain what we mean by all of this. And then I am also going to explain what we mean by an annuity. Yeah, I think these are the key things. And also I'm going to explain what we mean by number of intervals. Number of intervals is usually in years. So I'm just going to take you through some of these definitions and also time value of money. Okay, so I'm going to take you through each of these. So it's important before you start looking at questions, you should understand what we mean by the present value, the future value, the interest rate, discount rate, or cost of capital, what we mean by cash flows, whether we have a regular pattern or irregular pattern, which is unconventional, what we mean by an annuity, number of intervals, sorry, this should not say time value of money. Yeah, I meant to say timeline, what we mean by a timeline. Okay, so this is what I'm going to take you through in today's recording, and then after that we'll look at some examples from your assignment. So let's start by explaining what we mean by the present value. What do we mean when we say the present value of money? What does that actually mean? And then I'll also take you through each of the definitions one at a time. So firstly, you need to understand what we mean when we say the present value of money. Okay, when we talk about the present value of money, we're referring to the value of money today. Okay, the value of money today. Whereas if we talk about the future value, when we talk about the future value of money, right, we are referring to the value of money in the future. So in other words, the present value of money is the value of money today, meaning the value of money in the present, whereas the future value is the value of money in the future. Okay, so you might find that 10,000 Rand today, right? If you deposit 10,000 Rand today in the bank, you might find the bank might say after 5 years, we will give you back this 10,000 Rand as 16,000 Rand. Okay, so this is in the future. Let's say it's 10 years later, or maybe let's say it's 5 years later, right? Okay, so if you go and deposit money at the bank might say if you deposit 10,000 Rand with us today, after 5 years, which is the future, we'll give you back your investment as 16,000. So we can say that the future value of 10,000 Rand, right? The future value of 10,000 Rand 5 years from today is 16,000 Rand. And likewise, we can say the present value of 16,000 Rand being received after 5 years, the present value of 16,000 being received after 5 years is 10,000 Rand. That's what we mean when we talk about the present value or the future value of money. We're just looking at a sum of money, then we are finding out how much it's going to be worth in the future. That will give us the future value. Or we're taking some future amount of money, and then we're finding out how much it's worth today, which is the present value. So when we talk about money, the value of money today is not the same as the value of money in the future. And because of that, we have to distinguish between the present value of money and the future value of money, right? And then someone might ask, why is it that the value of money today is not the same as the value of money in the future? Why is it that 10,000 Rand today ends up being 16,000 Rand in the future? And the reason that happens is because there is risk associated with giving someone money for some time, or there's risk associated with you borrowing money. Okay, so there's always risk associated with money being invested or risk associated with money being borrowed. And there's also inflation. We also have to factor in inflation, right? So the value of money today is not the same as the value of money in the future because of risk, because whoever you lend money to or whoever you borrow money from wants to be compensated for risk of lending you money or borrowing money from you and so forth. You want to be compensated when you lend money to someone, and when you borrow from someone, they also want to be compensated for risk. There's always a risk that something could go wrong. So they require a return because of that risk. And also, the value of money today is not the same as the value of money in the future because of inflation. Okay. Inflation is also tied to risk. Money loses value. Something might cost 10,000 Rand today. Let's say a laptop, for example, might cost 10,000 Rand today, but 5 years from now, it might cost 16,000 Rand. So it's obvious that if you borrow 10,000 Rand or if you invest 10,000 Rand, you might want to be compensated for inflation, the rise in price. So that's why the value of money today is not the same as the value of money in the future. So usually, this risk and this inflation, it's accounted for in an investment using an interest rate, right? An interest rate is a measure of the return that you get on your investment, whether it's money invested today and then you get it in the future. A certain interest rate, there's a certain interest applied to this 10,000 to make it worth 16,000 after 5 years. So the interest rate, we can call it the return. It's the return you get or the return you pay. So it's the return you get or the return you pay when you invest a sum of money for a certain number of years. Okay, so the interest rate is the actual return you get, and it's measured as a percentage. Yeah, the easiest way to look at the interest rate is to just look at it as the return you get when you invest money for a certain number of years. We can measure return in monetary terms. For example, 10,000 Rand today and 16,000 Rand in the future. That's a monetary return of 6,000. But we can also measure that return per year as a percentage, and we call that the interest rate. Okay, so I've taken you through what we mean by the present value. I've taken you through what we mean by the future value. I've explained why the present value of money is different from the future value of money. And I've also explained what we mean by an interest rate, right? It's the percentage return you get on your investment. Okay, so once you are comfortable with that, please make sure you understand all this. Don't worry too much about the return. We're going to be looking at it a lot later on in the module, right? Once you are comfortable with understanding what we mean by the present value of a sum of money, the future value of a sum of money, as well as the interest rate, which is the percentage return. Usually an interest rate is per annum, meaning per year, so it would be the percentage return on your investment per year, right? Once you are comfortable with all those terms, you also have to know where we find these particular items on our financial calculator, right? Okay, so we're looking at time value of money, right? So I've taken you through what we mean by the present value. I've also taken you through what we mean by the future value, and I've also explained about the interest rate, right? Which is the required return. When you invest money, is the return you require on your investment, and when you borrow money, is the return required by the person who lent money to you, right? So on your financial calculator, the present value is represented by PV, the future value by FV, and the interest rate by I over YR. Okay, so these are the buttons that represent the present value, future value, and the interest rate. On some other calculators, the interest rate is actually just I over Y. It's actually I over Y. It's just I over Y. Okay. So if we go to our HP calculator right here, you'll find that PV, this is the present value. FV, pressing this button is to activate the future value. And I over YR, don't worry about the error, I over YR is to activate the interest. Okay, so now you know what this means, you know what this means, and you know what this means. Okay, so those first three items I said you should be comfortable with. You need to know what we mean by the present value, the future value, and also our interest rate. And I said our interest rate can also be called a discount rate, and it can also be called cost of capital. You might even have to calculate this sometimes, but it's a later study unit that we will look at. We'll look at how to calculate these later on, especially the cost of capital, what we mean by this in later study units, okay? And then, so I listed 7 items you're supposed to know: present value, future value, the interest rate. And then I also said you're supposed to know about cash flows. What do we mean about cash flows, right? So sometimes you might have an investment. Let's say as a company, you build a new factory, right? And then let's say we have time 0, time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, time 5, right? You might find that as a company, you're going to build a factory worth 100,000, meaning this is a minus, meaning 100,000 Rand is going to go out at time 0. And then after 1 year, maybe the factory is giving you 25,000 Rand. After 2 years, the factory is giving you 30,000 Rand. 3 years, it's giving you 50,000 Rand. Then 60,000 after 4 years, and then 80,000 Rand after 5 years. So you might have a factory that you built, and then the factory might be giving you these sums of money. Now, these amounts that I've written up here, they are known as cash flows. They are the cash flows associated with this project of building this factory. That's what we mean by cash flows. It's just the cash coming in from a particular investment or from borrowing money, whether it's money going out or money coming in. And this diagram that I've drawn, this diagram that I've illustrated and drawn up here, it's known as a timeline. So a timeline is always a helpful diagram. I always recommend to draw these if you have some description about money coming out or coming in and you want to really understand what it's all about, right? You can draw what we call a timeline. A timeline is just it's a diagram showing cash flows at different times. It's just a diagram showing cash flows at different times. So it helps you to understand the problem that you are dealing with. Once you illustrate a problem on a timeline, it's easy to really understand what the problem is all about. Okay, and you also need to note that when you have a project, but we'll look at this in more detail, it's just for definitions now. When you have a project involving money going out at the beginning and then money coming in for a number of years, money going out in the beginning and then money coming in for a number of years, we call this a regular or conventional cash flow pattern. Okay. When you have money going out and then money coming in for a number of years, we call that a regular or conventional cash flow pattern. But sometimes things are a bit different. You have money going out, right? You have money going out, and then sometimes you have money going out at the beginning, and then after 1 year money comes in, and then maybe money goes out again, then it goes out again, then it comes in, then maybe it comes in. So you see now we have money, we have different signs here. It's not just positive, 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 positive. We have positive, negative, negative, positive, positive. It's now mixed. These cash flows coming after the initial investment are now mixed. When this happens, we say we have mixed cash flows, or we say we have an unconventional cash flow pattern, right? We say we have an unconventional cash flow pattern, or we say we have an irregular cash flow pattern. Okay. So, but we'll look at that when we're doing capital budgeting. So on your financial calculator, cash flows are represented by this button right here. This is how you activate the cash flow function, CFJ. So I'm also going to show you how to use that function, right? And then, so we've talked about the present value, future value, interest rates, cash flows, time value of money. Lastly, you need to know about what we mean by the term annuity, and also what we mean by number of intervals, right? An annuity is similar to cash flows. It's similar to the cash flows we were talking about, but with an annuity, it represents a series of payments. Either you're making payments, a series of payments, or receipts, meaning you're receiving money. So an annuity is either a series of payments or a series of receipts at regular intervals, right? And it's usually the same amount of money. For the purposes of this module, we'll just work with annuities which are the same amount of money, right? So what do we mean by this? I can illustrate this through a timeline. Let's say you retire, and then once you retire, let's say it's agreed that at the end of each year, you'll receive 250,000 Rand. That's an annuity. It can be an annuity due or just an ordinary annuity. When we say annuity due, it means the money is being received at the beginning of each year, right? So with an annuity, you're just receiving the same amount of money at the beginning of each year or at the end of each year. So you need to read the question carefully to see if they say the annuity is paid at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year. So this is an example of an annuity. It doesn't have to be every year. It can be every month, every 6 months. It's just receiving a uniform sum of money for a certain number of years, or even in perpetuity, meaning forever, at the beginning of every year or at the end of every year. That brings us to, so on your financial calculator, right, the function for an annuity is PMT, this button right here. Don't worry about, I'm just pressing the button this PMT button, it activates the annuity function. So by the time we're done, you'll be able to do all those calculations. So the PMT button is for annuity function. So remember, you have to activate you have to read the question carefully to see if it's an annuity at the beginning of each year or at the end of each year, right? So that's very important. Are your payments at the end of each interval? It's not always a year, they're at the end of each interval or at the beginning of each interval. With time, you'll be able to see that. And then lastly, when you're dealing with time value of money, you have to be very careful when it comes to the number of intervals. Usually the intervals we work with when we're dealing with time value of money are the number of years. You'll be told you invest money for a certain number of years, or you're receiving cash flows for a certain number of years, right? But we don't always work with years. Sometimes in a question, they'll work with intervals based on months or even semi-annual intervals, meaning that you might be receiving money or getting or paying money every 6 months. And we also have quarterly intervals. So you can sometimes have monthly intervals when you're receiving money or paying money, semi-annual intervals, or even quarterly intervals, right? But the most common types of intervals we usually deal with are years, but occasionally we'll deal with intervals which are not years. And on your financial calculator, the function for the number of intervals is n. It's n, this n right here. This is the function for the number of intervals. So I've taken you through 1, 2, 3, 4, these top 5 functions, as well as the cash flow function. These are going to be the most important functions you deal with, if not the only ones. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We'll also talk about the NPV, IRR, and the beginning end, these ones in red later on. Otherwise, for this module, we just deal with these buttons and this button and then these 3 red items. Those are the functions you need to worry about, okay? So I've taken you through the definitions you need to know with regards to time value of money. So I'm just going to finish this first class by taking you through some examples from the assignment, just to illustrate how we can actually do calculations involving time value of money. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of helping you understand how to use your financial calculator, I'm going to look at 2 examples just as we finish this lesson. I'm going to look at 2 examples. The first example is going to be my own example. And then the second example, this is going to be mine. I'm going to just introduce you to your financial calculator so that you get comfortable with it. And then the second example is going to be question 1 from assignment 1. Right. So this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be the second question. So let me start by taking you through my own example, and then I'll take you through this example from your assignment, just to help you become a bit confident with your financial calculator. Okay, so my first example is going to be an easy one, right? Let's say I invest 10,000 Rand for 3 years, right? At 9% interest per annum, meaning per year. Most of the questions we're going to be dealing with will be interest per year, right? And then, okay, interest per year. And then the question is determine my total investment after 3 years. How much is my money worth after 3 years? Okay, So the key thing here is, as always, I always advise you to draw a timeline just to understand what's happening. It's always helpful. At time 0, I invest 10,000 Rand. After 3 years, I'm going to get a certain amount that I want to determine, and the interest rate is 9%, right? So I invest 10,000 Rand. This is my PV. By the way, we always put a PV as a negative. I invest this money for 3 years. So 3 is N. These are the number of intervals. The interest is 9%. That's I over YR. Remember, this is PV. And then I want to determine the future value. How much is my money worth after 3 years, right? So we always put a PV as a negative. That's how much I invest today. I invest the money for 3 years at 9% interest per year, and then I want to determine how much my investment is worth after 3 years. That's a future value. So I can come to my financial calculator, and then I can clear it. You always press this red shift button, then you press C, and your calculator should be on 1 PYR. By default, when you buy your calculator, it's on 12 PYR. It's on 12 PYR. But what you should do if it's on 12 PYR, you press 1, then you press this red shift button, then you press this PMT PYR button, right? And then your calculator will be on 1 PYR. Okay. So now I'm going to input everything. I invest 10,000. So we put it as a negative because it's a PV. And then 3, and then I press N to show 3 is the number of years. The interest rate is 9%. I just press 9. There's no need to put the percentage. So I just press 9. Then I press I over YR for interest. And then I want to get the future value. Then I press the FV button. And you get 12,950. Okay. So you get 12,950. So that would be the answer here. So this is just an example of a time value of money question. You put each item first, minus 10,000, then you press PV 3, then you press N 9%, then you press interest, and then FV to give you your answer. Okay, so that was just my example. So you can calculate almost anything. You can calculate your interest rate if you put in everything else, your N if you put in everything else, and always remember to put your PV as a negative. But in this module, you tend not to get problems like this. Let me now take you through something that's most likely to come in an exam or in an assignment through question 1. So we'll finish with question 1. This is from assignment 1. Question 1. Dr. Jones is evaluating his medical practice, right? That will allow him to retire in 5 years. Early, he has received 650,000. He has received an offer of 650,000 Rand for his practice and can invest this amount in an account earning 15% per annum, compounded annually. If the practice is expected to generate the following cash flows, these are the cash flows, advise Dr. Jones whether or not he should accept the offer and retire now. So now we've been given a scenario in which someone is being offered a sum of money for their asset, right? They're being offered a sum of money for their asset, but they expect the asset to give them these cash flows, right? And they can invest this money in an account earning 15% per year compounded annually. Okay, so I want us to solve this problem as we finish the class. Let me just explain what's happening here. Okay, so we can draw a timeline just to illustrate everything that's happening here. 3, okay, We have time 0, time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, time 5. We are being told that this doctor knows that the practice that they have is going to generate these cash flows. So the practice is the asset. So the doctor knows that the asset that they have, which is the practice, will generate 160, 160, 130, 130, and 100 over the next 5 years, right? So this doctor has been offered a sum of money of 650,000 Rand today. The doctor has been offered this money today for this practice, right? So we are being asked, should the doctor rather accept this money today, or should the doctor rather continue with the practice and get these sums of money in the future, right? So this is option A, and this is option B. What should the doctor choose? And we're being told that the discount rate applying for the doctor when the doctor invests money is 15%. That's the discount rate applying when the doctor invests money. So what we need to do, we need to find the present value of all these cash flows. And then we need to compare the present value of all these cash flows with the present value of what's being offered today. And whatever has higher value is what the doctor should choose. Okay, remember, we can't compare 650,000 Rand today with money that's being received in the future, because the value of this money in the future is not the same as the value of money today because of inflation and risk. So we need to find the present value of all these cash flows, the present value of the cash flows associated with the practice. If the present value of the cash flows associated with the practice is higher than the money the doctor is being offered, the doctor should stick with the practice. But if the present value of the money being offered, which is 650 today, is higher than the present value of these cash flows, the doctor should rather take the 650. So I'm now going to illustrate to you how we determine the present value of a stream of cash flows. So to determine the present value of these cash flows, we use our financial calculator. Remember, nothing is being received at time 0. All these cash flows are coming at the end of each year, okay? These cash flows are coming at the end. This is very important. They're coming at the end of year 1, 2, so nothing is coming at time 0. So we can use our financial calculator. From the practice, nothing is coming at time 0. That's the first cash flow at time 0. 160, it's the cash flow at time 1. 160 again, it's the cash flow at time 2. 130, it's the cash flow at time 3. 130 again is the other cash flow at time 4. And then 100 is the cash flow at time 5. We are using a discount rate of 15%. And then we use the NPV function on our financial calculator to give us the present value of these cash flows. Okay, so how do we get the present value of these cash flows on our financial calculator? We clear our calculator, right? And then 0, at time 0 we get nothing. 160, that's CF1. 160 again, that's CF2, that's the second cash flow. 130, that's the next cash flow. 130 again, it's the next cash flow. And then lastly, 100, it's the final cash flow. We put our discount rate of 15%, 15, then we press the interest button. And then we press this red shift button and we come to the NPV button here, PRC NPV. We're activating the red part. And we get 469, 636 and 13 cents. So it means the present value of those cash flows, of all these cash flows, is 4 469,636.13. So that's how much, that's the present value of all these cash flows. That's how much all these cash flows are worth today. They are worth 469,636.13. Okay. So according to that, we can see that the present value of these cash flows is less than what's being offered today. So if we bring all these future cash flows back to today, the answer we are getting is less than what's being offered for the practice. So what's being offered today is more than the present value of these cash flows. So rather, the doctor should choose to sell the practice because what's being offered is higher than the present value of the stream of the future cash flows. What's being offered today of 650 is higher than the present value of the stream of cash flows. Okay, so that's how time value of money questions work. So something important, you can also do this calculation involving tables, but unfortunately I'm out of time for now. But as we go through and we do different examples with time, as we do exam questions and other assignment questions, I'm also going to illustrate how you do these calculations through tables. But for now, I would advise you to rather get more comfortable using your financial calculator. Okay. So thank you very much for listening to the recording. I think for today we will end there. And then as we continue next time, I'll take you through more time value of money questions just to help you to get more comfortable with them. What I would advise you to do, you can look at question 5 as homework. Please try question 5 as homework. Try question 5.1 and 5.2. We'll also go through this. Remember, I'll also give you the solutions. I just want you to try this to see if you can use your financial calculator to get the present value of the stream of cash flows. Remember, we can use a financial calculator or tables. I think in the next class, I'll show you how to use tables as well with this example, but I would advise you to use a financial calculator because it's 6 marks, meaning 3 marks for each of these, and a table is tedious and it takes time, so I would rather advise you to use a financial calculator, not a table. So thank you very much for listening to the recording. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions or queries with regards to anything covered here or anything else to do with the module, please feel free to let me know on the number on the screen. I won't always be able to get back to you promptly, but I'll try to do so as soon as I can. Thanks once again.